Welcome to a tale woven with threads of danger, desire, and the supernatural. I'm AC Dawn, your narrator and author of Crystal Clear, a paranormal Halloween novella. I plan to release a chapter each day leading up to All Hallows Eve. Keep in mind, this isn't your typical professionally produced audiobook. It's a personal reading and a chance for you to hear the story as it echoes in the mind of its creator. If you're eager to leap ahead and hear the entire tale, you can follow me on my Ream subscription for free and gain instant access to the full recording. But for now, let us take our first steps into a world where ancient evil stirs and the fate of humanity hangs in the balance. Chapter 2. I know, they're a mess. The young woman confessed, eyeing her chipped nails when I asked to see her hands. I wrecked them changing a flat tire today. Taylor, that's my boyfriend, was supposed to help me, but something came up. She continued to babble about her multiple jobs and the hours she volunteered at the animal shelter. I listened to her ramble, examining her palm before I released her hand and turned my attention to the faux crystal ball at the center of the table. Letting your visitor talk was the best way to figure out what they wanted to hear in their fortune. Her palm revealed her vitality and strong creativity. The wavering love line bore testament to the woman's eagerness to love and be loved. The disturbing amount of marriage lines foretold the outcome of her soft heart. I just want to know. The woman paused before turning a pleading gaze on me. Taylor says he needs to talk to me, and I just know he's going to pop the question. Is that what you see? That he's going to ask me to marry him? I sighed. Her boyfriend was going to dump her, though it took no psychic powers to figure it out. No boyfriend would let his girlfriend work multiple jobs and change her own tire if he were considering marriage. I stared again into the swirling clouds and chose my words carefully. I do see marriage in your future, but perhaps not immediately. The woman gasped and smiled. I was planning on a long engagement. I need to finish school, you know. I didn't correct her. You have a big heart and a pure soul. Your road to happiness will be rocky but fulfilling, and nothing is impossible for a willing heart. I murmured with the solemnity of an oracle. I'd found the last 2 tidbits in a fortune cookie, but they'd seemed to make the young lady happy. Oh, thank you, the woman said and jumped up. I knew it was all going to work out. She slipped out of the tent with a smile on her face, and I shook my head. Perhaps it ultimately would work out for her, but it certainly wouldn't be the way she was planning. I glanced at my watch. Almost 9 o'clock. The festival shut down at 10. Even with an hour to go, the thrumming energy of the crowd ebbed, giving way to a quiet anticipation as the night deepened. A chorus of crickets and the night symphony rose, competing with the laughter and carnival music. I wondered if I could skip out early. Being banished to this far corner of the festival meant traffic had been light all evening. My skin prickled and my stomach knotted itself into a ball of nerves as my unease continued to mount. I just wanted to go home, make a cup of tea, and zone out in front of the TV until I fell asleep. For the umpteenth time, I dug into the pocket of my gypsy skirt and pulled out a well-worn piece of paper. I'd found it tucked between the pages of Pride and Prejudice earlier that day. Creased to the point of falling apart, it still held the faintest smell of old ink and musty paper. As the moon rises, so will the king of the night. You must see what you have never seen. Do not hesitate, for the future balances on a knife's edge. I sighed. The tent suddenly seemed small, claustrophobic. The twinkling lights cast shadows and the swirling fog clouded secrets, hiding them just beyond my sight. I needed some air. Thanks a bunch, Granny, I muttered into the darkness as I slipped out of the tent and paced back and forth, keeping a wary eye on the graveyard. Getting a note from my dead great-great-grandmother didn't bother me. It was a semi-frequent occurrence. She had sent the first one to me on my 8th birthday. My powers had just begun to manifest, and as I poured a bowl of cereal, a tightly rolled note came out with the sweetened cornflakes. Get a cat, was all it said. I thought it was a strange new cereal box toy, but when I showed it to my mother, she called my grandma on speed dial. We were at the animal shelter when it opened. I picked out a scrawny black and white tuxedo cat with an insatiable appetite and named him Mr. Shoes. He had renamed himself Count Sebastian of the White Paws when he became my familiar and was undoubtedly curled up in my chair, snoring the night away. When it came to edicts from great-great-grandma Adelaide, my namesake and the most renowned seer of her generation, the Buckley women didn't fool around. Over the years, I received regular messages from beyond the veil, warning me of everything from the potential of bad weather, to my computer crashing, to my niece's birth. Unfortunately, the messages were rarely as clear as that first one. Written in riddles and cloaked in ambiguity, they held dozens of potential interpretations. And my grandmother and mother spent hours debating them. Today's message was no different, but the weird sense of apprehension made it feel ominous. When I walked into the shop this morning, my old first edition copy of Pride and Prejudice tugged at me to pick it up. Usually, it was a quiet, unassuming book. It rarely demanded attention, unlike so many other things in my shop. The book itself held no significant memories, just echoes of the hands of people who held it, but the scrap of paper that marked page 115 had instantly filled me with dread. I'd spent the entire day musing over it, turning the infinite possibilities of the cryptic words around in my mind. Unable to bear the inevitable debate, I didn't show it to my mother or grandmother. As midnight grew nearer, and my stomach felt like I was riding a perpetual roller coaster, I second-guessed that decision. Maybe this was a warning, and I'd missed the opportunity to alert my coven of something terrible. With another long sigh, I pulled out my phone. Its brightness made me blink as I texted Katie. Me. Closing up shop, skipping the meeting, and going home to watch a movie. Come over later if you want. I shivered as a silvery fog slithered through the graveyard. Spirits of the dead. Katie. Are you okay? Me. Yeah, just tired and blah. Katie. I'll bring you some chocolate. Be sure to text your mom, LOL. I laughed. When I didn't show at the coven celebration, my mother would corner Katie and show her no mercy. Me. I will. Later. There was no way I would give my mother enough time to find me. Looking forward to a steaming mug of chamomile tea, I turned to shut down magical, mystical Adelaide for the night. I did a double take when a shadow detached itself from the darkness. My heart jumped to my throat as a man stepped into the weak light spilling from my tent. I stumbled back, swallowing down a shriek. The man advanced further, and I put a hand over my heart, catching my breath and finding my balance. Rising in response to my fright, magic swirled within me. You are the seer. The man stated it in a voice like honey and smooth whiskey. I nodded and tried to place his accent. Not British, something older. He sounded like one of my antiques. Goosebumps broke out on my arms, and I glanced toward the cemetery. The spirits drew closer to the fence, almost like they were drawn toward the man who emerged from the night. Actually, my crystal ball isn't working well tonight. I stepped back. Something about this guy didn't feel right. Tell me where my queen is to rise, the man demanded. With a sigh of resignation, I plastered a smile on my face. Probably the easiest way to get rid of him was to give him what he wanted. Magical mystical Adelaide had one more fortune to tell. Do you have a ticket? I asked as I pulled the tent flap open in invitation. He stared at me for a heartbeat before moving past me into the tent. The light fell across his face and my heart jumped all over again. Handsome didn't come close to describing it. Angelic, beautiful, carved by a master sculptor. All the usual cliches came to mind. Still, I couldn't think of a word that encompassed his sheer perfection, but also conveyed the intensity that resonated with him. It was like standing next to a panther. A ferocity simmered within him, rolling off him in waves of suppressed aggression. The sooner I got him out of the tent, the better. Right. No ticket, I guess, I murmured, but the man didn't even glance at me. I gave him a wide berth as I crossed to my chair on the opposite side of the table. He stood motionless, with his hands crossed over his muscular chest. His medieval-style black linen shirt was open to his waist, giving a glimpse of those sculpted muscles. His shirt tucked into black breeches that were, in turn, tucked into black leather boots. "All you need is a cape for a killer Dracula costume," I said as I sat down and settled into my role. I smiled and brought my gaze to meet his. My thoughts scattered as he stared back at me with deep brown eyes that held the weight of the world. Brown eyes always made my insides go gooey, but his shot molten lava through me. Holy cow, this guy was all kinds of dangerous. When he didn't respond, I pushed on with my script. "So, you want your fortune told?" My voice came out in a squeak, and I gave myself a mental shake. I just needed to play my part. I swept my hand over the table. "What will it be? The ball? Shall I read your palm? Perhaps the cards?" "My queen will rise with the moon." "Where?" he demanded, and pointed at the cards. Surely to goodness, this guy didn't think he was the vampire king. I suppressed a sigh. Why was it that I finally got a good-looking guy in my tent, and he was batshit crazy? "Okay, let's see what the cards have to say about this queen of yours." I picked up the tarot cards, a deck that had been handed down through my family for generations. A shock, like a static electricity zap, shot through my hands as I shuffled. That was odd. The cards had never communicated with me before. Typically, I felt the presence of my ancestors when I used them, a warm, reassuring energy, but tonight they held a different message. My mind wandered as I dealt, worrying about what to do with the insane man who looked like a god incarnate. I laid down the standard 3-card spread I used in the tent. It was simple, quick, and easy to interpret. The past, the present, and the future stared at me. I blinked at them, taking a few moments to realize what I saw. The inverted magician, the tower, and the inverted wheel of fortune lay before me. It spoke of untapped talents and an unfulfilled promise of the past, a tumultuous time in the present, and a bad luck or reversing of a cycle in the future. I dealt myself the same reading all week. Crap. Distracted, I'd made a beginner's mistake and hadn't focused my mind on my subject. The ominous reading took on darker tones as the man towered over me with a frown. With a brisk swipe of my hand, I gathered the cards and shuffled them back into the deck. The man glowered his displeasure. "Make haste, Adelaide Doreen Buckley. We have no time to tarry. I must be there when she rises." His words rumbled low and sinister. My hands froze. The man's scowl sent a shiver of fear down my spine. He knew my full name. My heart hammered, and the man's nostrils flared, as if he could smell my fear. With an almost audible click, the pieces of the puzzle snapped into focus. His physical perfection, the barely controlled violence I could sense just below that flawless surface, the graceful movements followed by the statue-like stillness, and his general eeriness all coalesced into focus. Vampire. My mind screeched it hysterically while my mouth went dry and my hands shook. I dropped the cards and scrambled away from the scowling undead creature. "Get out," I hissed and cast a spell of protection around myself. "There is no time for this nonsense. Deal the cards, tell me the place, tell me the name, and I will be gone. I mean you no harm." His low words filled my head with a pleasant fuzziness. It took a moment before I realized he was enthralling me and snapped an additional shield around my mind. I had to stay sharp. I couldn't outrun him, so I had to think my way out of this. "Stay out of my head," I snapped, before softening my tone to what I used with my niece when she had a meltdown. "Look, you've got the wrong girl. I don't have the sight." I didn't add that it wouldn't matter if I did. Foresight didn't work for vampires suffering delusions of grandeur. "So, sorry, you're gonna have to find yourself a different witch." He put up his hands in a placating gesture, like he was trying to reassure me, and gave me a slow grin that made my stomach flip. Focus. Vampire in the tent. This was no time to get goofy over a good-looking guy. "I can feel the magic in you. You're even more powerful than your—" He paused, calculating for a moment. "Great-great-grandmother is what I suppose she would have been. She told me on my next rising I was to meet her descendant, bearing her name, on the edge of the Garden of the Dead. I have spent the last 100 years looking forward to it. Your grandmother was an exceptional woman, and a very fine dancer. I gaped at him. This couldn't be. The time and place of the Vampire King's rising were secret to protect the seers. The odds that this was the actual Vampire King were so astronomical, I couldn't even fathom them. No, this was beyond comprehension, and at the moment it didn't matter. Despite the legend and the treaty, witches and vampires didn't mix. You're insane. With a flick of my wrist, I scattered the supports holding up the tent. In the collapse of canvas and wood, I made a slicing motion with my hand and cut my way out. His curses followed me as I scrambled free of the heap. At the edge of the cemetery, my feet stumbled to a stop. A spectral crowd undulated beyond the fence. Their ethereal whispers rode on the wind as they waited for the moment the veil would thin and they'd be at their most powerful. I didn't want to go in there. The thought of wading through the onslaught of spirits made my corn dog roll in my stomach. I'd rather face the insane vampire. Ripping fabric alerted me that the vampire in question had freed himself. I glanced over my shoulder as he emerged from the canvas. His handsome face wore a mask of fury. Adelaide Buckley, you cannot run from your destiny. Tell me where my queen is to rise, or risk the peace that is held between our people for generations. The words thundered around me. Holy goddess and all her goodness. I muttered an incantation and plunged into the garden of the dead. Thanks so much for listening. As the shadows grow longer and Halloween draws closer, we will continue to unravel this tale of danger and desire. If you can't wait for tomorrow's chapter, you can follow me on my Ream subscription for free and unlock the full story right now. But if you prefer the suspense of waiting, join me again tomorrow for the next chapter. Until then, remember, the fate of humanity and a single heart hangs in the balance. Tomorrow, we venture further into the darkness.